Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, July 11th, 2022. Time for another show. Time for a Slurpee, I guess. It's 7-Eleven Day, I just realized. And I was in a 7-Eleven recently and saw them getting ready for the big free Slurpee giveaway thing that they do. And I don't know. It doesn't matter. Who cares? Because, you know, it's not like they're paying for the announcement or anything. But hey, if you love Slurpees, today, I guess, is your day. Although, quite honestly, there are so many wonderful things, so wonderful products. All right, whatever, never mind. They're not paying for the ad. I did notice, though, that when I went there, I was recently doing some outdoor work in the blazing heat. Not that recently, because it's been kind of mild lately. But at any rate, and said, you know what would be great? And then I said, I would love a trademark Slurpee. And I went to 7-Eleven looking for them. And by the way, I couldn't find any. Slurpees should just permanently come. So they should have every 7-Eleven have to have the Mountain Dew flavor permanently. I think for a while they were all generally, you could depend on them to have one or two solid flavors and then some variety, which they should just stop because most of the other flavors are terrible. But they used to have the Coca-Cola one all the time, which I did not like. But Mountain Dew one ought to be everywhere. And I would go from 7-Eleven to 7-Eleven searching for them because sometimes it would turn up. Anyway, I went there looking for one, and all they had were the little small size ones. And I'm an American, and I want a gigantic one. But nobody had them. And then I realized it seemed like they were stocking up on the small cups and not putting out the large cups. I think in preparation for this 7-Eleven Day where you get a free small Slurpee. They're not crazy. They're not going to give away the whole store. That's their big product. Everyone loves it. You know, whatever. I don't know. It's probably the tiniest margins for them. Anyhow, they had reams and reams, I guess you would say. Maybe if it was paper rather than cups. But anyway, just huge stack, like a whole end cap stack full of small cups, small Slurpee cups, which I imagine they probably don't use very often during the rest of the year to give away the free Slurpees. And for like months and weeks in advance, you can't get anything but a small Slurpee around here. I don't know what it is, but Joe Biden's got to do something to stop it, or else he's going to just keep sliding in the polls, and that's number one issue in America, I think. That's what I've heard in my polling, but I'm not asking everybody. Anyhow, that's something fun you can do on 7-Eleven Day. The other thing you could do, I guess, is play the 7-Eleven lottery. And, that's it. That's it for the show. Goodbye, everybody. I just wanted to update you on that. There are other things that happened, developed over the weekend. As you know, it is Greg Dworkin's task. Thank God. It's not mine, but, I mean, it should be. But I know he's going to do it. And what am I going to do when he takes a vacation or something? But he's rounded up the stories from the weekend, of which there are many. We're back into, it's like almost mid-July already. The summer is flying by. It is a week that contains January 6th committee hearings. That's good news. We're all ready for the next installment in, as Greg calls it, the telenovela. And I think we're about ready for that. Let's see. Over the weekend, well, I don't know. What engaged you over the weekend? Well, you could, by the way, let us know on the KITM hashtag, which I am able to monitor with somewhat more success now. I told you they took away my tweet deck for Mac, and I got a note from, was it Matthew Rigdon, who sent it over the weekend, that there's an app for that, essentially. There's something out there that, what the hell, how would you call it? Is it an app? Fluid is the name of the app, and I don't remember exactly where the hell you can get it. I'll have to look up Matthew's tweet, but I don't know, fluid.com possibly. I'll check on that one. Once I found the solution, I put it all aside. I said, I'm the only one who needs this thing, and no one else. I really did think everyone else ought to hear about it. Fluidapp.com, I believe, is it. I don't know if it's only for Mac. Yes, I guess so. Turn any website into a real Mac app with Fluid. they say. It's a free download, though they have a pro version of the thing. I don't know exactly what you get out of that, but that's $5. But I'll endorse that, right? Free download anyway. I don't know how the pay one goes, but Fluid seems to do the trick. You download the app. It opens up a little dialog box. It says, what's the place that you want to turn the web page into an app? I put the Twitter in there, the TweetDeck, tweetdeck.twitter.com, and poof, I had it back. The window's a little small when you open it up, but you can expand it like anything else. And that puts it back down on the toolbar for me, which means I can flip back and forth very easily without really looking, and not have to go searching for which of the tabs is the one I want to open. And even if I separate the tab and put it in a different window, and I got to go hunting for the window getting buried under there. So thank you, Matthew, for solving that problem. If you had the same problem, or maybe you have something else that you want to turn into an app or make it look like an app on your Mac desktop, and if that's your biggest problem, congratulations. We've solved it. And thank you for coming by today. And now you can donate tons of money for us to give $5 to the Mac App Fluid people, and maybe subscribe to another newspaper that we steal all the stories from one of these days. Except it won't be a Rupert Murdoch one. I'm going to continue to depend on Greg for access to the Wall Street Journal when that becomes necessary, so that we minimize the amount of money that the Murdochs are able to take from us. And then we can finally get rid of them one day and launch them into the sun as they deserve. But until then, occasionally we do have to read their coverage, especially when it's got interesting news, like one of the 27 interesting bits of news you have lined up for me this morning. Good morning, Greg.
Oh, good morning.
That's what
so not just the Wall Street Journal, but also we have things from The Atlantic, The Economist,
Those
The
are the
Spectator,
people we really need to pay.
The Independent.
Yes. Right, and the Times of London very frequently.
The Times of
London,
them in the Torygram, the Telegram.
Yeah, there's all kind. Well, we want to spread the wealth to the extent that we can.
Meaning you want me to pay for it, so you don't have to.
Well, that's the best way to spread it, is spread your wealth.
That's what I thought you said.
Yeah,
well, and that's okay. I mean, that's what I invest my retirement money in. It's just interesting.
Okay, yes. No, I'm paying for more subscriptions these days than I used to.
Well, the whole model is changing online. So, like, if you want to read stuff, you have to subscribe. And that's fine for the national publications.
Obviously, yes.
But it gets really dicey when you're trying to pick up local news. Like, every time I want to read something about Arizona.
They need to find a solution for that, because I want them to be remunerated for their efforts. I'm glad they're there.
They should have a network, you know.
Yeah.
Like, we're part of the USA Network, so if you subscribe to USA Today, you get all the locals. That's my
Elon
suggestion.
Musk
and
something
that way I
useful.
pay less, and I think it's a great idea, and they should do it.
Yeah, I think so too. And there's a business idea in it. We might have to buy all the newspapers in America, but
buy one, get 20 free.
Right, and today at 7-Eleven, you should be able to get get a free Slurpee with every newspaper you purchase.
Right, exactly, or a free newspaper
like
with every Slurpee, whatever it is you want to do. The thing is, we have so many different topics today. It almost defies logic as to where we start, and so I'll pick something at random, and let's do Jolly Old England.
Yes,
and finish up on some of the Boris Johnson stuff.
Oh, okay. Great. Boris doesn't sound very English, but there you
go. Boris Johnson, who's been naughty, had to step down, as you know. He stepped down as party chief. He's still the prime minister. He wants to be a caretaker. It's unclear whether the circular firing squad that's going on in the Tory party, the Conservative Party, will allow him to do that. So the Spectator has, it's sort of like a chatty column called the Coffee House. It's kind of like a political playbook, except for England.
I see.
And they have a very funny picture of the Tory party in a circular firing squad, which is pretty much what's going on there.
Yes,
but if you open up and click on the picture, you'll see that at least one of the persons with the circular firing squad actually has the rifle pointed at himself.
One thing I'm checking. I'm looking.
You can look at like
who is that?
right, at 8 o'clock on the circle there.
Yeah. It's Andrew Jackson.
Yeah,
I don't know who it is.
which
It's
is
what it
pretty
looks
funny. So you have to appreciate this, like, how shall we say this in adult speak? Some of the things that they covered highlight some of the important points that were made on this show last week.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a nice way of saying, look, I was right. You should have bloody well listened to me when I told you this.
Bloody well, yeah.
But the fact is that the infighting amongst the Tories is exactly what the Republicans in the United States are trying to avoid. So now we got 11 different MPs running.
Wow.
And each one of them is taking aim at one of the others. And it's absolutely splitting along the party lines of the loyalists are really mad at the rebels and won't support them and are circulating behind the scenes scurrilous memos and white papers about who they really are. And then the rebels are really ticked off at the loyalists for dragging the whole party down. And you have a couple of people like the centrists who are actually trying to run an American-style campaign declaring, I'll already tell you in advance who my vice prime minister is. They don't have a vice president.
I guess not.
And trying to run as a ticket, which is kind of unheard of there. And, you have people who are likely to be the final candidates, like Liz Truss, and people who are currently leading with half of the Tory MPs already endorsing somebody, but they're dividing it amongst 11 people. And the 1922 committee, because they were elected in 1922 but set up the Rules Committee in 1923, and they've decided what the party rules are from that point onward, which is why they're called the 1922 committee.
All right.
So their executive elections are to be held this afternoon. I don't know what the corresponding Rules Committee is for the American parties who decide what the rules would be. That's usually done at conventions. But I'm not sure if there's a standing committee that decides these things.
I see.
Or who it is. Maybe you do. I don't.
Oh, well, in the parties?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, who would decide what the Democratic rules are for who can be a candidate for the next primary?
Oh, that's, I would say
there's no real
state
parallel.
Parties. Right? Yeah, maybe state party organizations?
But there's no national way to do this. So the 1922 executive elections are important, and there's sort of something that doesn't quite have a U.S. parallel. And they're going to be held this afternoon. And there's been suggestions that the committee could raise the threshold for entry into the race to weed out no-hopers.
Okay. Yeah, that's, I guess that'd be right. It's like the state party. I mean, we have our RNC and DNC for presidential races, but yeah, for parliamentary /
Well, this is essentially
races.
A presidential race.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So there are parallels, but not really. It's a yes,
really,
but
exactly.
Yes, but no.
Yes, but no. Membership favorite
Perfect
Ben Wallace decided he's not running. Johnson loyalist Jacob Rees-Mogg, who really reads like something out of a Monty Python satire from the Silly Party. And if you ever read stuff he says,
cartoon.
Absolutely.
I wish I knew.
Tall guy with a monocle who says dumb things. That would be Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I wonder if that's him in the cartoon. I'm trying to guess who's who. I have no idea.
A Tory attack memo laying out all of Rishi Sunak, one of the leading candidates' perceived failures, was leaked.
Wow.
And a full list of who's running and who's backing here. So it's really tearing themselves apart, which I think is great if you happen to manufacture, for example, popcorn.
Oh, yeah. Good for those people. And,
now, Max Hastings has an interesting piece in Bloomberg, also behind a paywall. Boris Johnson exits, but the damage to the UK will linger. Brexit was just one of many unforced errors, and the next prime minister isn't likely to fix things. Now, he has a very interesting perspective on Boris Johnson. Johnson, who announced his resignation on Thursday, has done little during his 3-year premiership and nothing over the past week that has not been common, mean, or both, referring to Andrew Marvell's famous lines on King Charles I 1649 execution. He nothing common did or mean upon that memorable scene. So if you want to be a hero, be like that guy, except Boris Johnson is no hero. And Max Hastings, right, the cynicism of his own Conservative Party was awesome when in 2019
Awesome,
its members of parliament anointed him as their leader. They know him to be a serial liar, an adulterer, previously expelled from the leadership, notoriously lazy and chaotic. And again, we're going over Britain for two reasons. It's interesting in and of itself, but also tells us a lot about the current Republican Party. They calculated, however, that he was a vote winner among people who were not traditional Tories, but embraced him as a lovable clown who would make politics fun. You know, The Apprentice, he's a celebrity. Some of us said at the time that government is not meant to be fun.
Well, yeah.
Few familiar with Johnson's habits and record, he worked for me for 7 years when I was a newspaper editor, thought him remotely qualified for public life. Though a brilliant journalistic entertainer, he's a narcissist of heroic proportions. A decade ago, when Johnson was mayor of London, I wrote that he had never seemed to care for any human being save himself. You can see the Trump parallels here. If ever he achieved his ambition to become prime minister, for many of us, a new life in, Argentina, for example, would suddenly seem very inviting. And that remark caused Johnson's father, Stanley, a figure cut from the same cloth as Boris, to taunt me at a wedding a few years back. Why aren't you in Buenos Aires? I responded that thanks to his son's policy, I couldn't afford the airfare.
Okay.
Right?
Damn.
So Johnson adores what the great 1960s U.S. administration figure George Ball once called the satisfactions of power. He has governed with embarrassing incoherence. He defies rules, conventions, and even law. He offers apologies for nothing, will obviously spend the years ahead writing memoirs, making speeches, and perhaps attempting to wield a wrecking ball against his successor's government. And again, this comes up because as the different people maneuver to try to replace him, he's already got the knives out for anybody who voted against him. Yeah. So he's working behind the scenes the way Trump does. In other words, in the United States, one of the reasons, and we'll go over the wonderful piece by Mark Leibovich about this, one of the reasons that people like Lindsey Graham and Kevin McCarthy cling to Trump is they're afraid that if they don't, he will wreck the party because he carries enough followers, even if not to win again, than to at least do damage. If he told his followers to stay home, you can't trust Kevin McCarthy, he's a rhino, or you can't trust whoever the next Republican nominee is because they're not, really MAGA and they don't really, this, that, and everything, it would really severely harm their chances, and they're terrified of that.
Yes, probably.
Because clinging to power is the only thing they care about. And so that's like an important thing to keep in mind. So anyway, getting back to England. So you have this contest going on. Take the parallels to the U.S. where you can find them. They're not exact, but a lot of it rings true. And you should also keep in mind that the equivalent mega, make England great again.
All right.
People are really in a tizzy. They have their knickers in a twist, as they like to say, across the pond.
Yes.
Because they don't know exactly what to do. This is from Sherelle Jacobs in the Torygraph in the Telegraph. I'm beginning to fear that Brexit will be crushed. Ultra Remainers are on the warpath, and this Tory chaos is giving their case a new lease on life. Basically writes, too long to read or behind a paywall, we won. We savored victory. Now it's under question because the people we beat down and thoroughly defeated appear to have risen up again, and I can't stand that.
Oh, well. Ultra Remainers. That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you can't just be a Remainer. You have to be an Ultra Remainer.
Yeah.
Which is to say, after I beat you over the head, you still cling to your principles.
Right. Like maybe disintegrating Europe after decades of peace.
Right, and the fact that Brexit isn't working out at all, here's how she explains it. This is a grave situation for the Conservatives. The fact is that Brexit is a leap of faith. Amid widespread elite skepticism and renewed Remainder resistance, the project will fail unless the Tories can find a leader who believes in it enough to drive it forward. A leader who understands that Brexit, which fuses free market economics and sovereign populism with American sovereign citizen, I suppose, exemplifies the political third way that Tony Blair strove for but never found.
What? No.
But in truth, conservative fealty to the Brexit cause has been disintegrating even under Boris Johnson, which she decries, by the way. She's very unhappy about this, as the blob has sapped the government's will. The great fear is Tory party now elects a closet Remainer who doesn't have the conviction to take all this on. The Brexit dies with a whimper. smothered by bureaucratic inertia, then finally strangled after the next election. If Brexiteers want to avoid this fate, they must think like war strategists once again, and that means confronting the extent of their current weakness and taking their opponent seriously. I gather she's suggesting that we get help from Putin and sabotage democracy. I don't know what she's saying exactly.
Not sure, but she doesn't want to say that outright. She's not proud enough of that. She's not a proud lad.
Right. So, keep that in mind as we turn to the United States, and we'll do that a little bit before the break. So let's turn to January 6th. A reminder, tomorrow's January 6th committee is going to deal with Proud Boys and Oath Keepers,
right?
Who really are oath breakers. Sure. And the committee meeting is not at 10 a.m. It's going to be at 1 p.m.
Aha, great.
And then there's another one on Thursday, which is Trump not doing anything for all of those minutes. Longer than the Rosemary Woods gap in the Nixon tapes. And I think that one might be primetime evening.
All
Not
right.
sure yet.
Good. I know they need another one of those.
But Scott McFarlane writes, Justice Department court filing overnight in Steve Bannon case. Now, this is justice, not the negotiation with the committee.
Yeah.
But it's important because it explains a little bit about why Steve Bannon's making noise. Justice Department court filing overnight in Steve Bannon case, and this is a quote from the Justice Department. Defendant's last-minute efforts to testify almost 9 months after he's default to the January 6th committee.
Yeah.
He still made no effort to produce records, and they're irrelevant to whether he willfully refused to comply in October 2021 with the committee subpoena, which is what DOJ is interested in. The prosecutors go on to say the defendant's sudden wish to testify is not a genuine effort to meet his obligations, but a last-ditch attempt to avoid accountability. The defendant's timing suggests that the only thing that's really changed since he refused to comply with the subpoena is that he finally is about to face the consequences of his decision to default. So as a result, he's negotiating the circus with the committee. Bannon wants 3 rings. And the committee's not clear whether or not, actually, as I wrote on Twitter, the only thing the committee's really interested in is subpoenaing the elephant. They could really care less about the rest. So I'm not clear whether Bannon is actually going to testify. The other thing that's been made clear is that he's claimed executive privilege, but actually not only is Trump incapable of giving it to him because he doesn't qualify, it's not even clear Trump tried to give it to him. Trump announced he rescinded it, but there's no evidence he gave it in the first place.
Okay. Well, he shouldn't.
So Marcy Wheeler was taking Hugh Lowell to task this morning for writing that it seems to have been rescinded. Where's the, as you often will say, did they hand deliver the document, and how do we know? Where's the document that actually says that Trump gave him executive privilege? He just claimed it.
Yeah, I guess. Who knows? Trump and paperwork.
Not that the document is worth anything, but at least show me the document.
I guess so. Not the gravest sin in the world, but Marcy loves taking people to task, so why not?
Well, she's a detail person.
Yes. So, yeah, I understand. So he's trying to get out of, I guess he thought maybe if I offered to testify now, they won't go ahead with the prosecution. But justice seems determined, and there apparently are negotiations. He wants to testify, or he says he wants to testify for the January 6th committee, but that he needs certain circumstances under which he wants
certain
to
circus.
Yes, he wants it to be a live on television thing, and then I assume he wants to filibuster and have what he thinks will be his, have you at long last no decency moment, and he's going to call out the committee, and if they try to silence him, I'm being silenced. How dare you? But I think they're smart.
And the committee, of course, knows that and wants no part of it. Marcy Wheeler points out, if Bannon were serious about testifying truthfully, he'd ask to do it in closed session. If he were really serious about staying out of prison, he'd get new lawyers and negotiate a cooperation agreement with DOJ. He's doing the opposite in both cases. So this is, basically all window dressing.
Yeah, okay, I'll buy that. That sounds like good analysis to me.
Meanwhile,
yes,
Justice Department, again, Scott McFarlane, Justice Department says it has evidence of an accused Oath Keeper conspirator having bomb-making instructions, and another had a death list with names of Georgia election officials, and another figure had transported explosives to D.C. and alleged plans to strike between January 6th and inauguration. Wasn't there like a unnamed somebody left a bomb
There
at
is.
DNC headquarters, something like that?
Yeah,
I mean,
and
along with the
RNC.
scaffolding, these are things that haven't been identified specifically yet as who did it, who the perps are.
Yeah, I'm not certain about the scaffolding, but the bomb thing they haven't nailed down. I know that. I don't know whether I feel like for some reason they knew who brought those pieces of that gallows in their truck, but since I can't tell you who it is, it's a mystery.
Well, for
I think
now,
you're right.
it's a unstated,
Yeah.
maybe they know, but we don't, kind of piece of information. You don't just keep gallows pieces, scaffolding in your
You
pocket.
don't.
So somebody had to decide to do that and then go ahead and do it.
I find it
But
hard
the
to believe
point
they
is,
can't
this is a pretty
identify that
violent
person.
group. Remember, they didn't even have guns. Well,
Yes,
that's nonsense.
That turned out to be not true as well. Right. There was another story over the weekend about it. I think they have. Wasn't a huge amount of people, but I think they're up to like half a dozen people arrested with guns that day. They just didn't.
Well,
I don't
not
know.
just that. The Proud Boys were there to push people and break windows.
Yeah.
And the Oath Keepers had stashed, again, a little bit more paramilitary. They recruit from military and sheriff's departments. The Oath Keepers had scattered caches of weapons around D.C.
Yes.
That's part of the deal. That's what we're going to learn tomorrow.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's part of their deal, part of their, I mean, almost like cosplay, except, you never know exactly when that's
except
gonna...
with guns.
Yeah, right. Like, hey, that's a great costume. Oh, ouch. That's a terrible costume. It's not a costume at all. It's real. So, yeah, they're dangerous.
That's a great
folks.
costume, they said to the Joker.
Yeah. And I wonder, as you were saying, they recruit from ex-military, but also from among the police. And given that we've armed all of our police as though they were military, I wonder sometimes whether maybe some of those guns were even paid for by us. That wouldn't be the first time they've been turned against us. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We still plenty to go with the committee work, I think. Although I haven't summarized what's up for, and I got to look for this information. But I think I just saw. I'll have to look around on Twitter from the Blue Virginia folks. That
We're very good.
Yes, and I am pretty sure I saw our local nut. Not ultra local. She's not from my area, but many of you may ring a bell with you. The name Amanda Chase, which sounds like a fake name that you would give if the substitute teacher was passing around the sign-up sheet. But at any rate, Amanda Chase is our looniest sitting Republican state senator. She's been in the news. She, I think, was pulled over at one point and berating the cops and did the whole "Do you know who I am?" thing. Might even have been at the state capitol grounds, too. At any rate, that, and she was so loony during the COVID, back when we cared about COVID and social distancing and whatnot. She refused to wear a mask in the middle of all things. They basically put her in a lucite box on the Senate floor and made her sit and breathe her own stink, I guess. But at any rate, she's in the news.
Didn't she get her committee assignment stripped? And censured?
24-9
probably vote, says Wikipedia.
Yeah. All right, there you go.
With 3 Republicans joining the majority for conduct on becoming a senator and fomenting insurrection against the United States.
Yes. Speaking of which, I mean, she's not a popular figure even among her institutionalist Republicans. I mean, I think she imagines herself as the Virginian. She's one of a half a dozen women who've gone ultra MAGA and have said, I'm Trump in heels, or I'm the female Trump. Right? There's a lot of them. Anyway, she's got new reason to worry, I guess, about the fact that she's unpopular with some of her institutionalist friends and is charged with sedition. A couple of pictures circulating. Blue Virginia sent around the tweet. Seditionist endorses fellow seditionist. Came with a picture of Amanda Chase endorsing Virginia Delegate John McGuire in seeking his reelection. But at any rate, so the two of them endorsed one another, but I guess they were both there at January 6th. But Amanda got more. The other pictures in the tweet show that she's hanging out doing a Facebook Live video with Stuart Rhodes, the leader of the Oath Keepers, one of the two, I think, people actually charged with seditious conspiracy. And she's doing Facebook Live with him on January 5th, if that date rings a bell with anybody. January 5th, 2021, the, in fact, day before the insurrection. She found her way all the way up to D.C., hanging out with the Oath Keepers, doing Facebook Live. That's not something I don't think that you could just have walked in and said, hey, give me Stuart Rhodes for my stupid podcast. Like, I couldn't get him on, I'm sure. But Amanda Chase, I guess, well enough recognized as a seditionist that was the case. So, we'll be keeping an eye on that one. And
okay, keep an eye out for that name as we
Amanda
listen to the hearing.
Chase. Yeah, we'll see if she comes up.
So the next story here is from the New York Times. Aquilino Gonell, who was sergeant at Capitol Police, originally from the Dominican Republic, and very upset. He's a U.S. Army veteran and a sergeant. He's worked on the police force for 16 years, and he's never witnessed anything like January 6th. And he writes in the New York Times in an op-ed, I don't know what part of Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony enraged me most, that Mr. Trump wanted to be driven to the Capitol to lead the vicious riot. That's the important part that comes out of the suburban discussion from Cassidy Hutchinson, not whether he lunged or what the definition of lunge is, but that he wanted to go, that he'd spurred his supporters on, knowing that they were armed. That's the part about the magnetometers and wanting to take them down. Or that he ignored some of his advisors and even his daughter, who told him to call it off, allegedly fighting with his own Secret Service agent after he refused to let the president be driven there. Or maybe it was the fact that Mr. Trump eventually told the rioters, go home, we love you, you're very special. So he got the gist of the Cassidy Hutchinson testimony and sort of nailed it right there in a summary if you didn't see it.
Yeah,
other disturbing details I heard at the hearing had to do with Mr. Trump's apparent disregard for everyone but himself. Why, he sounds like Boris Johnson.
Yeah.
Before Mr. Trump addressed his supporters on the ellipse ahead of the insurrection, he was told that those who were armed weren't being let through security checkpoints, and according to Ms. Hutchinson's testimony, he said, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me.
Yeah, someone else.
Of course, he's one of the people who was hurt, 9 people who died as a result of that horrific day, he writes, including the 4 officers who died by suicide after the attack. Weren't so lucky, neither was I. And describes his being savagely beaten and all the stuff that happened to him afterwards, which is pretty bad.
Yeah, he's had to retire, I think, from the force.
And his wife had to quit medical school to take care of him for his rehab. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that was incredibly disruptive.
Yeah, and he makes the great point of the number of we look to see the worst of the outcomes, but there were a lot of people, and among the rioters as well. He points out a lot of lives ruined by Donald Trump here, even some of his own supporters. Not that he cares.
Right. So I expect to hear a lot of that in the next 2 days, in the next 3 days, Tuesday, Thursday. Now, how did this happen? Why did this happen? Remember, Boris Johnson doesn't become PM without the aid and support of Tory MPs.
Yes.
Why did they do it? Why did House Un-American Activities Committee and all the other people in the 50s, support all the nonsense that was going on there with Joe McCarthy? Why are people in the Republican Party today supporting Donald Trump? So Mark Leibovich has a really interesting piece here in The Atlantic, The Most Pathetic Men in America, Why Lindsey Graham, Kevin McCarthy, and so many other cowards in Congress are still doing Trump's bidding. And he goes on to say, Trump's not that interesting, but the people who, suck up and kiss his butt, they're interesting.
I guess so.
Right? He says Trump said and did obviously awful and dangerous things, racist, cruel, achingly dumb, and downright evil. But on top of that, he's a uniquely tiresome individual, easily the sorest loser, most prodigious liar, and the most interminable victim ever to occupy the White House. He is quite possibly the biggest crybaby ever to toddle across history's stage, from his inaugural crowd hemorrhage on day one right down to his bitter ketchup-flinging end. Seriously, what public figure in the history of the world comes close? I'm genuinely asking, but the bottom line, Trump is extremely tedious. My former New York Times colleague David Brooks wrote it best. We've got this perverse situation in which the vast analytic powers of the entire world are being spent trying to understand a guy whose thoughts are often 6 fireflies beeping randomly in a jar.
All right.
But better objects of our scrutiny are the slavishly devoted Republicans who Trump drew to his side. It can never be emphasized enough. Without the complicity of the Republican Party, sounds like me here, Donald Trump would be just a glorified geriatric fox-watching golfer. I've interviewed scores of these collaborators trying to understand why they did what they did and how they could live with it. These are the McCarthys, the Kevin McCarthys, and the Grahams and all the other busy parasitic suck-ups who make the Trump era work for them, who humored and indulged him all the way down to the last exhausted strains of American democracy. So the GOP shame ongoing is underscored by the handful of brave Republicans willing to speak the truth. And, he goes on to say, basically, consider the doormat duo, McCarthy and Graham. I've known both men for years, at least in the weird sense political reporters and Pauls know each other.
I see.
They're a classically Washington type, fun to be around, starstruck, desperate to keep the jobs or get better ones, to maximize their place in the all-important mix. The mix is everything. On various occasions, I have asked them in so many words how they could sidle up to Trump like they have, and the answer basically is they did it because it was the savviest course, because it was best for them. If Trump had one well-developed intuition, it was his ability to sniff out weakness, and I suppose not just people, but the parties. Nearly all elected Republicans in Washington needed Trump's blessing and voters to remain there. Again, if he took his people and walked, they lose. People like McCarthy and Graham benefited a great deal from making it work with Trump, or, as they like to say in Washington, managing the relationship.
Okay.
McCarthy knew that alienating Trump would blow up any chance he had of becoming Speaker, so he cultivated Trump from the start. And the president came to refer to McCarthy as my Kevin, a term of ownership as much as affection, but managing the relationship was a daily struggle, McCarthy conceded. And, you've heard things that McCarthy has said behind the scenes, which are completely the opposite of what he said in public, and then justified as, but, it's Washington, so, leave me alone.
All right.
And you have the
I will leave him alone.
The recording of the best one, which is, of course, Dana Rohrabacher and Trump are the two people on Putin's payroll.
Yep. That's his, I think forever going to be his most famous quote, even though it wasn't even on point. But I'm glad he blurted it out. Why not?
So my attitude about my legacy is F it. That's a quote. I could quote the whole thing, but then you'd get in trouble. Rudy Giuliani told New York Magazine's Olivia Nuzzi in 2019 his fly was unzipped at the time and he was drunk on Bloody Marys. Other versions were a bit more erudite. Everyone dies, said Bill Barr. I don't believe in the Homeric idea that immortality comes by having odes sung about you over the centuries.
Is this all from the Atlantic in the same article?
Okay. Fantastic article.
Interesting.
And very long.
That's
so, it just goes on to say that it's just important to have a seat at the table, to be in the room, as they like to say. The room where it happened.
Yuck.
So, yeah.
All right.
So it's pretty disgusting. Tim Miller has a new book out, and David French, reviewing it also in The Atlantic, says, Tim Miller asks a question every conservative must answer. Who are you really? The genius of Tim's book, and I highly recommend reading it, he says, is that it cuts through the rationalizations, and the rationalizations are endless, and gets ultimately to a heart-level question. Who are you really? What's your core identity? I don't think those who live outside the American right understand the extent to which the upheaval of the Trump years impacted multiple intersecting aspects of personal identity. Oh, here they are doing identity politics and intersectionality. How do you like that? And expose the true hierarchy of personal values. Let's take the example of Lindsey Graham.
Yeah.
Yesterday in The Atlantic, Mark Leibovich published a scorching profile of Graham, Kevin McCarthy, and others.
Okay. We got
Right.
that one.
And he says, this is something I didn't quote from the article, but David French does. Once early in 2019, I asked Graham a version of the question that so many of his judgy old Washington friends have been asking him. How could he swing from being Trump critic to Trump sycophant? I didn't use those exact words, but Graham got the idea, and he said, well, okay, from my point of view, if you know anything about me, it'll be odd not to do this. This is to try to be relevant.
Okay.
Relevance, said Leibovich. It casts one hell of a spell. So David French says if you ask any person to describe themselves, and they'll likely respond with a mix of characteristics and virtues, they'll describe their profession. I'm a lawyer, I'm a banker, I'm a plumber, their relationships, I'm a husband, or politics, and ask if they might even describe their virtues. They might say things like honesty or fidelity. But what if the virtues conflict with what other core parts of a person's identity? Graham was joined to the hip with the maverick John McCain. So how would one describe Lindsey Graham before Trump? He was a senator. He was powerful. And while all politicians are flawed, I'd say he was generally perceived to be honest and independent. But then during the Trump years, honesty and independence directly and starkly clashed with status.
Yes.
And since you can't possess both virtue and power, the answer is power.
I guess so.
Right?
I mean, certainly for him.
The writer and Christian theologian C.S. Lewis wrote, courage isn't simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point. Another way of putting it is we really don't know if we possess a virtue till it's tested. So we have the people who put their lives on the line for the Capitol Police Force, and then we have Lindsey Graham.
Yeah. Yes.
Or Kevin McCarthy. Right?
Well,
so it's one thing to state the
pathetic.
timeless
That's
truth
true.
that when men and women face a conflict, they'll find a way to choose their status. They'll be like Lindsey Graham and choose relevance. It's another thing to find that impulse in yourself. Who are you? What would you do? And when you choose status, that answer can be compelling. A senior senator, a future Speaker of the House, a party chair, a Fox News contributor. The more one ties themselves to MAGA, the more the answer cannot include other descriptions such as honest, brave, true to oneself, whatever it is you want to describe it. So basically, it's not that complicated. Every single person in the Republican Party, whether you're a political operative or whether you're a voter, says, I have values, but forget them. We have to win. Right? And so let's take it a little closer to local and not national. Let's look at the Senate races. That's what I'll cover from now until I get off today.
All right.
Josh Kraushaar writes, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona Senate races all heading close to disaster territory for the GOP. And this is based on a piece in Politico. GOP Senate hopefuls adopt a high-risk strategy for November, but also a Daily Beast piece by Roger Sullenberger. Herschel Walker lied about his secret kids to his own campaign. So the thing is, it's one thing to lie to the public and to the press. But let's listen to this story.
All right.
When Herschel Walker's campaign aides approached him this winter to discuss whispers that Walker had a secret child, the Georgia GOP Senate candidate told his campaign the rumors are false. But Walker's aides already knew he was lying. They had expected him to lie. They had obtained documents in advance of that conversation verifying that Walker did indeed have another child. They handed the documents to him, and then finally Walker admitted it was true. His aides asked if there were any other children they needed to know about. Walker insisted this was it. So when the Daily Beast learned about the existence of that 10-year-old child in June and went to the campaign manager, Scott Paradise, said, had a statement, but first he went to Walker with a question. Be honest, are there any other kids? And no, Walker said. So then Paradise put out a statement insisting Walker was proud of his children. To suggest Herschel's hiding the child because he hadn't used them is offensive and absurd. And then the very next day, the Daily Beast asked about yet another undisclosed child, a 13-year-old.
Wow.
The campaign approached Walker and asked him again, and this time he said, no, this one's mine.
No, well, that was nice.
So this account of Walker lying to his own campaign about his children comes from a closely connected advisor and was verified by communications that the source turned over to the Daily Beast. We're not quoting from the messages, but the communications reveal a campaign and a candidate in chaos. Emails and texts show advisors discussing how they don't trust Walker, They harbor concerns that he isn't mentally fit for the job.
Well,
He spouts falsehood like he's breathing, this advisor said, so much that his own campaign stopped believing him long ago. He's lied so much we don't know it's true. They have zero trust in the candidate. 3 people called him a pathological liar. Okay?
Yeah.
Wait for it. And they're still working for him.
Well, he's got money to give them.
Well, they have a job,
Yeah.
That's just,
I
one
have
thing
to
is
put
more
food on the
important than
table.
another thing. And so, you go back and look at the Lindsey Graham's and Kevin McCarthy. How is this different?
Yeah.
They
I
know
don't
who Trump is. They do it anyway.
Right.
So nothing drives you crazy like, okay, I get that, but I have bills to pay. I have children to put through college. Of course I have to do this. Okay, fine. Well, then do it out in the open so everybody could know what a dirtbag you are.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't know. I love I understand the pressures, I guess, just from the outset. But these guys also spend their private time, whether they're working on a campaign or just angling for a new campaign, and want to work for another ultra MAGA type candidate. They love telling other people that they need to, quit their jobs, or why don't you just get another job if you don't like the one at Amazon or whatever it is. But, why don't you get another job if you're required to lie and prostrate yourself before liars every day to your great shame, allegedly. Kids, food, something, I don't know. Okay, everybody else has to go do this, but you get a pass because you work for a pathological liar. And what danger could there possibly be in electing pathological liars with multiple kids all over the place who nobody trusts and their consultants know they're lying all the time? Yeah, I don't know. What could come of it? All the
So what
signs.
could come of it is a political disaster.
Well, that would be great. We'd take that one.
Right, so
But we need a political
a campaign's
disaster for
worst
the
nightmare, said the
consultants, too.
source. It's like a crap show on a train in the middle of a wreck, but if the campaign is headed for a disaster, the Republican Party appears to be in the dark about just how bad it is. In conversations with GOP higher-ups, senior Walker campaign aides have held back on their ongoing struggles, even if internally they believe he's a serious liability. And the revelations come at a critical time. The national parties lined up behind Walker. Many establishment Republicans were lukewarm, but some of it's pretty bad, obviously, said John Cornyn. I'd prefer to have somebody else. But the skeptics couldn't stave off the MAGA-fueled boost Walker got, and so Cornyn, of course, endorsed him.
Yeah. There you go. That's
So that's it
over and
right
over
there.
again. Yeah, you don't have to be endorsing it. The senator from Texas doesn't have to endorse a candidate from Georgia. He just doesn't, Republican or not.
Right. So John Fetterman's campaign, running against Mehmet Oz, rented a plane with a big banner that said Oz for New Jersey. And then is posting on the Twitter account pictures of his mansion in New Jersey.
It's nice.
So who are you going to vote for, me or Dr. Oz? Jersey is strong.
Yes. I think there was also, they had a plane with a banner on there that
Hey, Dr. Oz, welcome home to New Jersey.
Yeah, right. Welcome home. Flying over the beach. Yeah, if you've been down to the Jersey Shore, it's not that everywhere that has that, is it? Flying over the. I've
I don't
seen
know,
it
you
in
can see it
Florida.
from
I've seen
a
it in
lot
New
of
Jersey,
places.
but yeah, but that might be an East Coast beach thing. But that's fun. Good job. Yes, or he might not even be at home entirely in New Jersey, given that he votes
there's a
in
picture
Turkey,
of that banner,
apparently.
so it's great. And then they also posted a picture of his giant mansion in New Jersey where he lives, and
Okay.
made a point to that.
Well done. I don't see how you would not point that out, since he's running for Senate from Pennsylvania.
All right, and since we mentioned 3, let's talk about Arizona just a little bit, because here's a guy that just doesn't seem to get any respect. Nobody's paying attention, and that's because the primary is until August 2nd, so he's not officially the candidate.
Oh, all right.
Blake Masters, who sounds like somebody who's like a golfer, but is actually a candidate for Senate in Arizona, and probably the
General
leading
Hospital.
candidate endorsed by Trump, who finds approvingly things to say about Nazi figures, didn't think World War II was something that we should have gotten involved with, hates the idea of taking on Al-Qaeda.
What kind of ultranationalist is this?
Thinks that unrestricted immigration is the only choice for a libertarian-minded voter. He wrote, I think, on Lou Rockwell. He certainly was a participant in that site. But then has changed his mind since And he's also been denounced for contemporary statements like his April 11th remark that America's gun violence boiled down to black people, frankly. And his apparent embrace of the replacement theory promulgated by white supremacists when he accused Democrats of trying to flood the nation with immigrants that change the demographics of our country. Mr. Masters' early writings covered a range of subjects and touched a number of tripwires for somebody with mainstream political aspirations.
Yeah, like you shouldn't have them.
Right. What he did write on Lew Rockwell is U.S. entry into World War I was a connection between the banking houses of Morgan and Rothschild. And
Jewish space lasers.
The Lusitania sunk because there was a conspiracy to not alert American steamship passengers about the threat.
Yeah.
His main source was C. Edward Griffin, an ardent libertarian who once said the protocols of the elders of Zion accurately describe much of what's happening in our world today. This is the guy who's running on the Republican ticket and will likely be the nominee.
Bad.
So you have Herschel Walker, you have this guy, you have New Jersey Oz, or Oz of New Jersey, Sir Oz of New Jersey, and you have basically the makings of a political disaster for Republicans in the fall, at least when it comes to the Senate.
It would be great if they Todd Aiken times 6.
Right. So they're working on it. And basically what the Politico article goes on to say is GOP Senate hopefuls adopt a high-risk strategy for November. And they're not even trying to run to the middle. You're supposed to run for your base in the primary, then run to the middle in the general. They're skipping that part. And so we'll see what happens. But, it's not an automatic win for them if they do this.
No. Good. Well, I'm glad there's some risk involved. That's good news. It's dangerous and weird.
Right. And that is the context that I wanted to provide before mentioning this new New York Times poll out this morning that everybody's talking about. That shows that Democrats think that Biden is too old and really would prefer another candidate. And he's got the weakest approval ratings ever. And, if you ask him to run against Trump, he beats Trump by 3 points.
Okay. I mean, yeah, good. Beating him is better. I'll take it. But, yeah, I know. A lot of anger. And I must say it's becoming tiresome that there's anger, then there's anger about the anger, and then there's anger about there being anger about the anger. And it's almost as if there were different people out there, and they had different ideas about how to do things. But what can you do? Everybody must vent.
Everybody must vent, exactly. But, part of the issue here is nobody's going to be running against Biden. Top Dems rule out Biden primary, urge others to follow. Ro Khanna says, I plan to support him because of the danger that Donald Trump poses. And the point is, and Biden has made that point himself, I'm not running against the almighty, I'm running against, the alternative. And the alternative are people like Herschel Walker and Blake Masters and Sir Oz of New Jersey and Doug Mastriano.
Lasers and
and they're putting all of this stuff out there, and some of the nutty cases in Wisconsin.
Amanda Chase, yeah. And
all of this, Amanda, so you have these folks, and, there's a lot of different things going on. I think it is fair to say that young voters who tend not to vote in off-year elections really don't like Biden. They tend not to vote in off-year elections and will things like abortion and gun rights and things like that, bring them out or not, that remains to be seen. Climate change and other things involve them personally.
Yes. All right.
And so they're not coming out to support Joe Biden if they come out. They tend not to come out, but these are issues on the table that directly affects them.
Yeah.
So Dave Leonard, who I've come to really loathe, has a column out explaining that, of course, it matters who you're writing against. So take the numbers in early July for 2024 with a grain of salt. On the other hand, he goes on to say that the leftists obviously are out of touch with America, and the conservatives have their finger on the button to where America thinks. And he says this because we make fun of the Republicans saying, what about gas prices? But that's exactly what Americans care about.
Yes.
They do, along with 19 other things, which polls really have a very poor way of trying to get at. And so you want polls? I'll give you some other polls to try to put this in perspective. Here's a Navigator survey polling, which finds a 24-point drop in GOP favorability with independents and 10 points overall. And that was out on July 8th. It's a very significant shift in a short period of time, more confirming data that the national landscape is becoming far better for Democrats. But I don't understand how that can be, because obviously Republicans have their finger on where Americans really are.
Yeah, well, they have their fingers in a lot of places they shouldn't be.
72% of Democrats more likely to vote now, big number. Other polls now have Democratic vote intensity higher than Republicans, not a typical midterm.
No.
And so it's a new bluer 2022 election. In 9 of the congressional generics since Roe, Dobbs, Democrats hold a 1.7 point lead, a shift of 4 to 5 points for Democrats, and that's a big deal. So there's a lot going on. And then Marshall Cohen separately has a poll from Monmouth. I think we went over this on the show at some point. Should members of Congress who assisted the planners of January 6th be removed from office among all Americans? 66% say yes. Amanda Chase, you already got thrown off your committees.
Right.
26% say no. Among independents, 65% say yes. 27% say no. Among Republicans, 48% said no. 36% said yes. If a third of your party agrees with independents and Democrats, you're screwed.
Well, good.
And of course, Democrats, 94% yes, 5% no.
Yeah. Easy. All right. Well, something gas prices. I guess that's the only one of those problems that actually poses any sort of any trouble for David Leonhardt. Nothing else among the numbers bothers
Right. Well,
him.
he's basically an economist. And remember, economists have the arrogance of thinking everybody thinks the way we do.
Well, that's
or as they like to say, a tree is only of value after you cut it down.
Well,
and use it for something.
Science.
Otherwise, what's its point?
As they say. Yeah, right. Well, they're moving things to their highest utility, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, abortion doesn't bother him. It's not something that's going to affect his life. Guns, I imagine he lives in a building with a doorman, and he thinks that's going to stop the guns. And once he gets upstairs, it's just him and the co-op board or whatever is the biggest threat in his life. And on occasions when he has to drive or has to pay a premium for Uber or Uber, what's the one with the black car, Uber whatever.
Lyft.
Yeah, right. So other than that, I guess that's the only one that that bothers him. That's Leonhardt for you. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Greg. And a reminder, Wednesday, we're out on Wednesday, but we'll be tweeting in between now and then, and we'll hear from you again on Thursday. Thanks very much.
Yeah, so we'll do Committee Day on Thursday.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio. Thanks to Greg for carrying us through the first hour. There's much to catch up on. We got a lot in. There's still a lot more, and we'll see what we can squeeze in between now and 11. Let's see. I'll bring you this piece. How will I order these things? Okay. 2 interesting things on, well, probably about 15 more that I haven't gotten to yet, but pieces on the Supreme Court, still much in everyone's everyday conscience, which is unusual, which I think points to some of the oddities in the polling. I think there's a pretty good chance that they actually can sustain this momentum. It's a long way to November, and I know that there are probably some consultants out there thinking we really need to, ratchet back so that we can bring back the Supreme Court outrage come November. I guess, late October and into November to try to motivate people, but that they won't be able to necessarily sustain the outrage between now and then. But the court's doing everything it can to help sustain that outrage by pumping out such a high volume of truly terrible decisions, many of which will lead to sustained protest between now and then. That another big story from over the weekend, of course, protest and the forms that it's taking. But in addition, given the subject matter and the way the subject matter sets up politically, like with the Dobbs decision and abortion in particular, that there will be outrageous state action on a pretty constant basis between now and November. The MAGA state representatives are going to be interested in keeping the agitation level high for their own elections come November. So they're going to continue to try to pass, one up one another with the most outrageous, most egregious abortion laws. And of course, those will produce real world consequences and cases that enrage people on a pretty consistent basis. So I don't know what to say, but I don't want to characterize it as, favorable or unfavorable for either of the sides, because I really don't know how it's going to break down. We're past predicting that sort of thing. But I think it's pretty unusual to have to be able to sustain that level of engagement that covers both outrage and enthusiasm, and to sustain that all the way through the summer in particular and into November. But I think this is one of those situations that's going to be capable of producing that kind of level of engagement. It's just going to keep feeding on itself. As I mentioned, protest much in the news. I didn't even put aside a story, I don't think, because it was just such part of the fabric of the background noise almost of American politics. But the big story of the weekend, I guess, was that Brett Kavanaugh didn't get to have dessert at Morton's Steakhouse. That's honestly like where we are in terms of the biggest story. And that doesn't mean it was a calm and serene weekend. It means that the most mundane things are elevated to all-out political battles for survival. So Kavanaugh, I don't know how you find out about these things, but apparently he goes to dinner at Morton's, a fancy pants steakhouse in Washington, D.C., big, it's kind of a stuffy old power brokers kind of a place to go. Everything is fancy pants and overpriced, but if your dad's paying for everything, it's a great place to go. I did it that way. Now, Brett Kavanaugh is like a successful kind of person and maybe should be paying his own bills at this point, but he's not because he's in quote-unquote public service. So his parents pay for his house and his country club membership and maybe for some of his baseball tickets and yada, yada, yada. The Supreme Court, you'd think pinnacle of the legal career. Legal career is a pretty lucrative thing. They should be getting paid more. But as they're mostly just political hacks at this point, why bother? But at any rate, other people will take care of your bills if you make it to the Supreme Court. Anyway, so he went to Morton's, and Republicans are crying because in their telling of things, there were protesters there outside of the restaurant, and by God, he had to escape, barely escaped with his life out the back door of the restaurant and was harried all the way home and had to, I don't know what. But anyway, the plain fact of the matter is there were protesters. They stood outside of the front of the building waiting for him to come back out so they could say that they don't like him very much. And he did not want that to happen because he doesn't like hearing that people don't like him very much. So he left the back way, out the back exit or something, as though that was this horrific, shameful thing to do, even though the whole staff leaves that way every day, but whatever. And he missed dessert. That was apparently somebody thought that was really interesting and had to be included in the story. Maybe they were making fun of him, but oh no, he missed dessert. Although dessert, like everything else at Morton's, can be an over-the-top big deal, and I understand. I don't know whether people were assuming he was having the souffle dessert. It's one of those places where they tell you, I think they have some sort of specialty souffle dessert. I can't remember whether I'm conflating that with some other fancy pants restaurants that I went to, but I think that they do it. Was that the place with the Grand Marnier souffle?
Morton's?
Yeah. Morton's, yes. Okay, so they have a Grand Marnier souffle.
They did 25 years ago.
Yeah, that one time that we went there 25, 30 years ago, they had a Grand Marnier souffle. I don't know. Maybe Grand Marnier is too out, as they might say. But I think they're a stuffy, staid kind of place, so they might stick by that sort of tradition. It has a long-standing tradition, deeply rooted in American history, so that's why Brett Kavanaugh orders it for dessert. They may have other kinds of souffles. I don't believe I've ever had another kind of souffle, so I might be confused about it. There are many other kinds. There's chocolate, minimum basic chocolate souffle. Never had it. Grand Marnier souffle, I believe I've had in two places. Morton's Steakhouse and maybe on our honeymoon, right? Something like. Anyway, the deal is you have to order it ahead of time, which is a difficult thing to do. You don't know what you're going to want to have for dessert, but that's their famous dessert. Even though I imagine Someone like Brett Kavanaugh has probably been to Morton's 100 times, but that's probably a big part of the thing. Anyway, so he didn't get to stick around and have his souffle. You got to order it ahead of time because it takes 45 minutes to cook. So you got to know what you want to have for dessert before you order your dinner. And if you're that kind of hidebound traditionalist person, originalists will have they'll have no problem ordering the souffle. Well, he didn't get to stay for the souffle, although I'm really not clear as to why that was the case. If he was leaving by the back door and that was successful, by the way, in thwarting the dangerous assassins / protesters, go out the other door. Like if you want to get just surround the place and then you'll catch him. But I guess he figured on fooling them because, I'll leave before dessert. Not that the protesters outside would have any clue as to either what he was having for dessert or when dessert was going to be served, except the general guess that it comes after the dinner. Even though it's ordered before the dinner, it's served after the dinner. The point is, all he did was miss dessert, which quite honestly, at his age, is probably a good idea. He's not an old man, but after a certain number of years, it gets more and more difficult to work off the Grand Marnier souffle. I don't know whether it was somebody's birthday, whatever. Certainly if someone was offering me a Grand Marnier souffle, I would stay and eat it, especially if I knew I could escape out the back door. That was a huge story over the weekend. He was murdered. He was nearly murdered. He wasn't even confronted. He missed dessert, is what it comes down to. That's what they were crying about all weekend. Now, I guess some of this is related to the other Supreme Court stories that I want to share with you. They're a little more substantive. But speaking of people paying Brett Kavanaugh's way through life in general, this seemed perhaps somewhat relevant. A Politico piece that, what the hell are we talking about here? Why is this being written? Let's find out. Operation Higher Court. Remember that the Supreme Court is our highest court, but not to evangelicals, of course. They appeal to an even higher court. Get it? Operation Higher Court. Inside the religious rights efforts to wine and dine Supreme Court justices. Where would you take someone to wine and dine them? Maybe, I don't know, Morton's? Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, well, that's one of the places that a, hidebound idiot would ask you to take them if they wanted to be wined and dined. A former evangelical leader, interestingly enough, details his group's extensive program to influence Justices Thomas, Alito, and Scalia, and look what happened to him, through meals and entertainment. And I assume probably a couple more targeted by the same sort of program, although not by this guy because he's a former something, now current, whatever the hell he was at the time, evangelical leader, must be taking over and likely doing the same thing. Whether it's baseball tickets, Grand Marnier souffles, who knows? Like I said, it didn't help Scalia much. It probably living high on the hog killed him sooner than he should have been. But okay, that happens. Thomas and Alito getting up there in age as well, and there's no point in waiting on filling up Brett Kavanaugh's cardiopulmonary system with cholesterol. Might as well get started as soon as possible. Peter S. Canelos and Josh Gerstein reporting for Politico this way. The former leader of a religious right organization said he recruited and coached wealthy volunteers, including a prominent Dayton, Ohio evangelical couple, to wine, dine, and entertain conservative Supreme Court justices while pushing conservative positions on abortion, homosexuality, gun restrictions, and other issues. I don't think these guys needed to be pushed too hard, but, why not add the whining and dining too, just to keep them sympathetic, I guess. Rob Schenck is our former evangelical leader that we're talking about here. Rob Schenck, an evangelical minister who headed the Faith and Action Group, headquartered near the Supreme Court from 1995 to 2018. Said he arranged over the years for about 20 couples to fly to Washington to visit with and entertain Supreme Court Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and the late Antonin Scalia. Schenck, who was once an anti-abortion activist but broke with the religious right in the last decade, over its aggressive tactics and support for gun rights. That seems odd. And said the couples were instructed before dinners to use certain phrases to influence the justices while steering clear of the specifics of cases pending before the court. That would be alarm bells for the justices, if they cared about anything, which they really don't. For example, to, quote, talk about the importance of a child having a father and a mother, rather than engaging in the particulars of gay rights cases. We should rehearse lines, and I love rehearsing lines for dinner, especially when if you already know what you're having for dessert, you have to have some variety in the conversation, but not these guys. I want to know what I'm having for dessert before I even eat the dinner. I'm going to steakhouse. I'm having a steak and the beef steak tomato that they had there and the Grand Marnier souffle, plus my conversation should be rehearsed. We would rehearse lines like, we believe you are here for a time like this, which is a reference to the Old Testament book of Esther, in which the Hebrew woman born with the name Hadassah, that's because it's Esther in Hebrew, becomes queen of Persia and succeeds in preventing a genocide of her people. So this is cultural appropriation. It actually is. But okay, that's they love the certain parts of the Old Testament. Very interesting to them. So we believe you are here for a time like this to overrule a previous settled law, etc., etc. Schenck said the goal was to create an ecosystem of support for conservative justices as a way of making them more forthright in their views. If you will overrule Roe, if you will rule this way on cases involving same-sex marriage, etc., etc., we will give you dinner. And you will know what you are having for dessert ahead of time. This is important. Now, I guess now, in light of this, we should be asking, who else was at dinner with Brett Kavanaugh? Maybe that would be an interesting question. No one has asked that one, or no one has answered that one, or I have not bothered to read what the answers are about that. Maybe that's all there is to it. Anyway, that's what Schenck was up to, but not this time, I guess, because he wasn't there for this particular dinner. The previously undisclosed initiative by Faith and Action illustrates the extent to which some Supreme Court justices interacted with advocates for the religious right during a period when the court grappled with social issues such as abortion and gay rights, which is always. The calculated nature of Faith and Action's efforts show how outside actors can use social activities and expensive dinners to penetrate the court's highly sealed environment. Thomas and Alito did not respond to requests for comment, of course, because they don't have to because it's a lifetime appointment. Scalia also, by the way, did not respond to requests for comment. Just thought I would throw that one in there. Efforts to reach the family of Scalia, who died in 2016, were unsuccessful. Also, efforts to reach Scalia himself. The Ouija board did not succeed either. Schenck's organization, Faith and Action, became a part of Liberty Council in 2018 and is now known as Faith and Liberty. That's what they're very creative in that. What should we do with Faith and Action and Liberty Council? How about if we said Faith and Liberty? Not council. That's too many words from your side. By the way, Liberty Council is Counsel, not CIL in this telling anyway. And so it's interesting, too, the whole thing. I don't know what he's doing now and where he stands now. Maybe there's more about it in the article. Keep reading to find out. But the beginning of it made it sound like Schenck had some sort of, ironically, epiphany and said, this is too much for me. I need to back off. I don't agree with this anymore. But actually, it kind of sounds like maybe his group was acquired by another one and they merged it and he got pushed out of leadership, and maybe that was his epiphany. Hey, these guys actually suck. They got rid of me. We'll see. Anyway, now it's called Faith and Liberty and Dinner and Dessert, I guess. Faith and Liberty and Wine and Dine. Its Vice President, Peggy Nienaber? I don't know. Nienaber. Nienaber was quoted earlier this week as, that's interesting, quoted earlier this week. She wasn't being quoted here. It's other reporters reported earlier this week that she was praying with Supreme Court justices in a recording posted on YouTube and reported by Rolling Stone magazine. No, you could listen to the tape and then quote her. What prayers was she saying? But anyway, the important part is she hangs out with and prays with them. And I don't know whether she also buys them dinner, but I assume that that's still part of the plan. At any rate, Schenck told the magazine that he began the prayer sessions. He did it. He started them as a way of building rapport with conservative justices in ways that dinner didn't, I guess. Matt Staver, founder and chairman of the Liberty Council. How is he the founder of Oh, okay. That's the original group before they merged. So Matt Staver, founder and chairman of Liberty Council, said, I don't know a lot about what Rob Schenck has done in the past. When he says he invited couples to wine and dine justices, I know nothing like that happened. I know of nothing like that happened. So trying to deny it, I guess, or maybe Liberty Council never did that. And maybe in overtaking or taking over Faith in Action and merging them, he didn't do his due diligence and find out what Schenck used to be up to. But they just merged for no particular reason. I don't know what you are or who you are or what you do or what your methodologies are. We just want to merge with you because we want to call our new group Faith and Liberty, and we can't do that unless we merge with somebody with faith in the name, apparently. I don't know. Obviously, he knows what they were up to, and that's why he merged with them. But okay, that's his denial. Schenck pointed to one prominent evangelical couple, Don and Gail Wright, with a W, of Dayton, Ohio, as major funders of his group, which established an office directly behind the Supreme Court building. So you could leave the Supreme Court building through the back entrance, and he wouldn't see you, and you could go straight to dinner with Faith and, what were they? Faith and Action people. Interesting. So, okay, Don Wright became wealthy through his furniture business and real estate firm, owning homes in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and Siesta Key, Florida. A little bit of vertical integration. He'll sell you a new house, and then you need furniture for it, I guess, and he'll sell you one of those, too. I'll sell you a furniture. How about that? There's a picture of Don Wright. Looks to be, at this point, an elderly gentleman, and there we go. Schenck said that in addition to making regular donations to Faith in Action, the Wrights financed numerous expensive dinners with Thomas, Alito, Scalia, and their wives, like Ginny, at Washington, D.C. hotspots, including the Capitol Grill. They love the steak places. Don Wright died in 2020, so Scalia's dead, Don is dead. They got to lower the cholesterol in their diets. I have to do the same, but, no one's paying for mine. I have to do all that, so I'm entitled to it. Gail Wright did not return a phone message left at her Ohio home. What about at Jackson Hole and Siesta Key? Seeking comment for this story, a request for comment made Friday to the family business Don Wright Realty, now headed by their son Scott, produced no immediate response. Don Wright's obituaries on Dignity Memorial and Legacy.com. This is not like shoe leather necessarily, but okay. They found this. Cited his charitable work with Faith and Liberty and his closeness to Supreme Court justices through his support for the Supreme Court Historical Society. This is basically like the policeman's ball here. Well, if you support this thing, then it looks okay, like we're hanging out together for open reasons when we're in fact hanging out together again at dinner for nefarious reasons. So, okay, they just happen to have a huge interest in supporting the lifestyle of Supreme Court justices and celebrating them as, important figures in American history, plus whatever dessert you want. And they liked that. Among the pictures featured on the Dignity Memorial site were images of the Wrights and their extended family with Scalia and Alito, and Don Wright with Chief Justice John Roberts. So he's in the mix here, too. The late Antonin Scalia enjoyed hunting and fishing trips with the Wright family, and that's how he died, too. But whether he was sitting in a hunting cabin with the guys, or dead in the hunting cabin bed, or at the Supreme Court dinner, he was always the same at a Supreme Court dinner. Wow. Read the obituary on both sites. In his own obituary, he talks about these stupid dinners. In reporting Wright's passing, the Dayton Business Journal wrote on August 3rd, 2020, as trustee of the Supreme Court Historical Society, they made him that too, Wright became friends with several prominent justices, including Samuel Alito, Clarence Thomas, and the late Antonin Scalia. An avid hunter/outdoorsman, Wright said Scalia would often accompany the family on hunting trips, and these hunting trips for Scalia are infamous at this point. The Supreme Court Historical Society newsletters indicate Wright was a major donor to the group and was elected as a trustee for a 3-year term in 2003 and again in 2006. Schenck said he met the Wrights at Faith Baptist Church in Sarasota, Florida, where he was a guest pastor, and they attended while staying at their vacation home in nearby Siesta Key. He said the Wrights had strongly conservative views on abortion, homosexuality, and gun rights, and dedicated themselves to reinforcing the Supreme Court's justices' own conservative views on the issues. They were the most active of the roughly 20 couples involved in the program Faith in Action called Operation Higher Court, Schenck said. All the couples knew they were being coached and adhered to a casual reporting procedure in which they offered feedback on their dinners with the justices and their wives, Schenck said. The Wrights were the most heavily involved of all the couples. They set the standards, Schenck said. They were the most active, the most engaged. Staver, of Liberty Counsel, said he is familiar with one instance of Schenck coaching couples on how to behave around Supreme Court justices, but it was in connection with the Historical Society banquet, not private dinners. What he did was he would talk to them, the couples attending the banquet, about protocol. I saw him do that once. He would talk to them about how these are Supreme Court justices, and he would actually say, don't talk about issues or cases, this is just a dinner. He used it himself to try to get people to contribute to Faith in Action. Afterwards, he would ask them how they liked it, the society dinner. That's the coaching he's talking about. He wasn't saying set them up to say this or them, say this to them or that to them. Well, okay, I don't think so. For his part, Schenck said that in addition to the dinners, Scalia was a guest at the Wrights' home in Jackson Hole. A financial disclosure report Scalia filed shows his transportation, food, and lodging for June 2006 visit to Jackson Hole were paid for by the Wyoming State Bar in connection with a continuing education program for lawyers. Similar reports show he spoke to the Wyoming State Bar in Cheyenne in September of 2008 and to the Federalist Society in Laramie in October 2012 with expenses paid by those groups. Property records indicate the Wrights sold their Jackson Hole home in 2013. No more justices willing to go to Wyoming all the time, I guess, so don't need it anymore. As the leaders of a separate branch of the government, the justices have long set their own ethical standards, which means they didn't have any. They are not bound by rules applied to other federal judges, and they make their own decisions on whether to recuse themselves from cases of conflict of interest grounds. The justices file annual disclosure forms under the Ethics in Government Act, requiring them to report gifts now worth more than $415 in aggregate, but meals are rarely reported as gifts. And personal hospitality received at a host's private home or business need not be reported. How do you like that? The justices also report annually on travel, lodging, and meals received in connection with speaking engagements and legal conferences, even if they make up crap about who's paying, like the Wyoming State Bar. Sure, of course they were paying. A review of more than a decade of financial disclosures from Thomas, Alito, and Scalia found no reporting of restaurant or other meals as gifts, aside from food being included with transportation and lodging expenses reimbursed by groups and entities sponsoring speaking events featuring the justices. There are a few public references to Faith in Action's work, or there are a few of them, with the judiciary, but a 2001 article in a Christian magazine called Charisma described the group's Operation Higher Court as offering prayer and ministry to the Supreme Court justices and dinner. The Supreme Court is the most insulated and isolated branch of the U.S. government, Schenck told the magazine. They do not interface with the public, so we've literally had to pray our way in there each step of the way. In the story, Schenck describes meeting and praying with Scalia just 24 hours after the court handed down its controversial decision resolving the 2000 presidential election, Bush v. Gore. Schenk's own decision to break with the religious right, if that's what happened, instead of his getting forced out, that's what I think happened, is detailed in the 2015 documentary The Armor of Light. Maybe we should watch it. And his 2018 book, Costly Grace, an evangelical minister's rediscovery of faith, hope, and love. He is currently the director of Washington-based Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute, whatever that might be, named for the German theologian who opposed Nazism. Well, good for him. I'm sure that was terrific. And probably thought about taking Hitler to dinner as a way of opposing the Nazism. Anyway, very interesting. I don't know whether he's really changed in any way or was just forced out. Or why spill the beans about this one, I don't know. But after the break, more about the Supreme Court. This time from a more about what they're up to themselves rather than the people who are trying to influence them. But I thought this was interesting background and good to have on record. We'll see whether it serves us well in 2 minutes after this. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's see. Put aside some other stories here while we're working. Okay. Anyway, time to jump back to a different story about the Supreme Court. This time, Ian Millhiser, always worth listening to on the topic, has this piece which, I don't know what, confirms all of our priors. So that's why we're going to share it with you. But in an interesting and organized way. Our priors are more scattered than this. The post-legal Supreme Court. How do you like that? That's a great headline. What happens if the court rejects the rule of law? Not a question most people are asking themselves these days, unless you are, of course, listening to our show and listening to me and Armando and Greg and Joan and everybody else come on and say, yeah, it's time to start thinking about thinking of the Supreme Court as, well, one, obviously a political branch, although it loves to pretend that it's the one that's not political, but it is very much political. And two, reminder that there's no appeal from these guys, and what they say goes, and it's only a matter of tradition that they even bother to tell you what they were thinking and why they're doing it. What if they just stop doing that? Or what if they continue telling you why, but it doesn't make any goddamn sense? Well, Ian's on that trail. We all are, but I thought it might be good to share his thoughts with you, as he usually puts them in coherent form. The highest court in the most powerful nation in the world, that's us, isn't that great, appears to have decided that it only needs to follow the law when it feels like it. Yeah. Last December, for example, the Supreme Court handed down a decision that fundamentally alters the Union, giving states sweeping authority to restrict their residents' constitutional rights. Which one was this? Well, that's what happened if you take the court's 5-4 decision in Whole Woman's Health versus Jackson seriously. And why take it seriously? Well, you're supposed to take it both literally and seriously. Jackson involved Texas's anti-abortion law SB 8. That was the one which allowed any person who is not employed by the state to sue anyone they suspect of performing an abortion after the 6th week of pregnancy, and to collect a bounty of at least $10,000 from that abortion provider. The court, you remember this one, the court allowed that law to take effect, even though abortion was still considered a constitutional right at the time. You remember way back when we had that constitutional right. If you apply the logic, from Jackson more broadly, any state could pass a law unleashing such litigious bounty hunters upon people who exercise any constitutional right. Perhaps the state wants to make it illegal to own a gun, or maybe it wants to allow bounty hunters to sue any black family that sends its child to a predominantly white school. And the federal judiciary will simply stand back and let it happen, if the logic applies, if they actually bother to follow the same logic. But, maybe they will, maybe they won't. No one knows. Realistically, the court is unlikely to allow these sorts of attacks. But, to spite abortion, the conservative majority was willing to open the door to them. Jackson, moreover, was only the beginning of a, what is this, Rumspringa? I don't think I even know what that is, and it's capitalized as well. I've never run into that word. Well, good for you, a $5 word in today's story. Ian, I'm going to look that one up, Rumspringa. Am I pronouncing it right? Is it? Oh, okay, I see what's going on. Okay, so it's also spelled, there's many alternative spellings. A rite of passage during adolescence, translated from originally Palatine German and other, this is the Wikipedia, another Southwest German dialects to English as jumping or hopping around, used in some Amish communities, but apparently it's also got a, well, whatever. I guess that's the, I'll continue to read. Used in some Amish communities. The Amish, you know about them segregating themselves from other communities as part of their faith. For Amish youth, the Rumspringa normally begins at age 16 and ends when a youth chooses either to be baptized in the Amish church or leave the community. They basically get their free shot at experiencing the world and then say, either come back willingly and dedicate yourself to the Amish church or leave forever, which is, what the heck? Like no pressure or anything, 16-year-old kid. Anyway, okay, so now I know where we're coming from on that. So what was the context of that? That was an interesting lesson. I have heard of that. I just didn't know what the word was. Jackson, that is the case, was only the beginning of a Rumspringa of conservative excess led by the court's Republican-appointed majority. I don't know if I love the usage there. Okay, in its just completed term, the Supreme Court overruled Roe v. Wade, of course, permitting states to ban abortions without having to resort to SB 8-style chicanery. It also overruled a seminal 1971 decision prohibiting the government from advancing one religious belief at the expense of others. It all but neutralized another half-century-old precedent permitting federal law enforcement officers who violate the Constitution to be sued. Or stewed. Might as well stew them. What the hell? Go all the way here. And the court's Republican majority dismantled 2 decisions protecting criminal defendants who were convicted or sentenced without adequate defense counsel, most likely condemning an innocent man to die in the process. That a linked story, of course, and you can look that up. The court endangered huge swaths of long-existing gun laws, striking down a New York state law that has been on the books for 109 years, like deeply rooted in everything. And it did so in an opinion that simultaneously fetishizes the Second Amendment's plain text while ignoring the first 13 words of that amendment, about the militias, of course, and well-regulated. The same court that attacked Roe is remarkably loose in its treatment of the constitutional text, or rather, that attacked Roe as remarkably loose in its treatment of constitutional text, saw no problem with ignoring half the text of the Second Amendment. You see what we're getting at here? In other words, no logic applies, but it's more than that. In what may be the most consequential environmental case in decades, the court relied on something called the, quote, major questions doctrine, which I've told you before doesn't exist. A fairly new legal doctrine that is never mentioned in the Constitution or in any statute, and that was invented entirely by judges, activism, legislating from the bench, to strip the Environmental Protection Agency of much of its authority to fight climate change. The court even abandoned any pretense that it must be honest about the facts of the cases it decides, claiming, for instance, that a public school football coach who ostentatiously prayed on the 50-yard line after games while surrounded by players, spectators, and members of the press was merely engaged in a, quote, short, private, personal prayer. It was a singularly alarming Supreme Court term. The court didn't simply abandon long-standing legal rules. At times, it seemed to abandon the rule of law altogether. Did it? Well, what is the rule of law? I make a strong claim in this essay, Ian says, arguing that the Supreme Court of the United States is no longer deciding many major cases in a way that is recognizably legal. So, and by that we don't mean that it has the force of law. It does have that. It just doesn't have the force of what's supposed to underlie law, that is, relying on precedent and logic and applying the two of them together and saying, what is the legal process by which we make our decisions? And we don't really care anymore. We're not going to do that. We're going to decide based on something else. Let's start by establishing a baseline definition of what constitutes the rule of law and what it means for a judge to act consistently with this principle. So we're getting deep. Societies that adhere to the rule of law must apply the same binding rules to all persons and institutions, including the state itself. According to the United Nations, these rules must be publicly promulgated, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated. And the rule of law demands equality before the law, legal certainty, and avoidance of arbitrariness. There's that word again, arbitrary. The late Justice Antonin Scalia offered one of the best explanations of how a judge can act consistently with the rule of law in a 1989 essay. And he said, when, in writing for the majority of the court, I adopt a general rule, I not only constrain lower courts, that's the point of it, right? I constrain myself as well. Because if the next case should have such different facts that my political or policy preferences regarding the outcome are quite the opposite, I will be unable to indulge those preferences. Unable to indulge those preferences. Now, it's not that he was unable, it's that he was unwilling to indulge those preferences because, sometimes he did indulge those preferences, but the idea here is that he would be unable to indulge those preferences because they would be contrary to logic and the way law functions. If you don't have a real reason and you can't differentiate from cases that came before that would seem to control here, then you just have to say, I've painted myself into a corner. I've made a bad decision. Sometimes that happens, but that's the way it goes. When logic applies, you just have to live with it. But then they realized, oh, we don't actually have to live with it. We can free ourselves from that. But this was the original idea. That's what the rule of law means. I think the United Nations definition is helpful. Scalia's exposition of it is helpful here too. All it means, though, is that they say, well, if I don't want to be embarrassed, if I want to be thought of as a logical person and someone for whom reasoning is key to everything that we do. It underlies all of what we do. It gives what we do power and authority. But what if we just say, we'll just take the trappings of power and authority? We wear robes. There's very few of us. We sit in a marble building. We're exalted. People give us free dinner, for God's sake. People get upset when we don't have dessert. That's how important we are. Do we really need to adhere to logic? Well, if we just put all the trappings here, most people don't really bother to read the logic anyway. A bunch of lawyers who have to litigate in front of the Supreme Court, maybe some radio hosts or something like that. But for the most part, people just say, all right, that's what the rule is. And I don't really need to know why. And then once they realized that, they just said, to hell with it. We'll do whatever we feel like. Scalia's formulation captures the rule of equality before the law. If a judge applies a certain rule to Republicans, they must be comfortable applying it to Democrats as well. Like if it's you get to carry your guns all over the place. Well, what about if black people want to carry their guns all over the place? No, that's not allowed. Why? Well, mostly because we're afraid of black people, but also because Republicans know pretty well or they're under the impression anyway that, oh well, they're also Democrats, and that's why we want to stop them from voting so much, but also because they're black. There's plenty of reasons to stop that, right? But when people point out, well, the original gun control laws, Republicans were all about gun control in the 60s when they found out that, oh, well, that means black people can get guns. And that'll scare you, right? And so they ran out and passed a bunch of gun control laws. And then they kind of got rid of them. And they figured, well, but if we get rid of these gun control laws, then black people can have guns again. Well, not if we beat the crap out of them every time we find a gun on them or shoot them every time we encounter them, then it won't matter. Oh, I hadn't thought about it that way because that's not equality before the law. I didn't realize we were getting rid of that. Scalia's formulation, again, captures the rule of equality before the law. If a judge applies a certain rule to Republicans, then they must be comfortable applying it to Democrats as well. If they apply one rule to people who oppose abortion, they must apply the same rule to people who support abortion. At least that's what we were taught, right? Similarly, Scalia's formulation advances the values of legal certainty and non-arbitrariness. While there are certain circumstances when the Supreme Court should overrule one of its previous precedents, lawyers and lawmakers should typically be able to look at the court's past decisions and be able to predict how the law will apply moving forward. When possible, the Supreme Court should hand down clear legal rules which enhance this predictability and that cannot be easily manipulated to hand down arbitrary decisions that favor some groups over others. With these principles of equality, clarity, and non-arbitrariness in mind, let's take a look at some of the court's recent decisions, shall we? Well, first, of course, Whole Woman's Health. Whole Woman's Health versus Jackson is one of the worst decisions, he says, in Supreme Court history. There are a handful of Supreme Court decisions that legal scholars refer to as the anti-canon, decisions that were so poorly reasoned and monstrous in their consequences that they are taught to law students as examples of how judges should never behave. And yet they are Supreme Court decisions, right? The anti-canon includes cases like the pro-slavery decision in Dred Scott, right? The segregationist decision in Plessy versus Ferguson, the anti-worker decision in Lochner versus New York, and the Japanese-American internment decision of Korematsu. The Whole Woman's Health versus Jackson case belongs on this list, says Ian. It is, as Chief Justice John Roberts wrote in dissent, so thoroughly inconsistent with the idea that the Constitution binds every state government that it threatens to transform that document into a solemn mockery. Jackson introduces an intolerable amount of unpredictability and arbitrariness into U.S. law, transforming the constitutional rights that every American should reasonably be able to rely upon into dust that can be blown away by a sufficiently clever state statute. So long as Jackson remains good law, no constitutional right is safe. To understand why Jackson is so troubling and why it threatens literally all constitutional rights, it's helpful to understand why Texas wrote this law to rely on private bounty hunters. As a general rule, someone who believes that a state law violates their constitutional rights cannot sue the state directly in federal court. Under the court's decision in Ex parte Young, an old case from 1908, they may sue the state officer tasked with enforcing an allegedly unconstitutional law. Thus, for example, if a state passed a law requiring state police to blockade abortion clinics, a plaintiff might sue the chief of the state police to block that law. But SB 8, the anti-abortion law at issue in Jackson, attempts to cut state officers out of the enforcement process altogether. SB 8 provides that it shall be enforced exclusively through private civil actions that can be filed by anyone who is not a state employee. It wasn't just that they brought bounty hunting into the picture. That was bad enough. But the reason they brought bounty hunting into the picture was so that there would be no state actor involved in enforcing this new law that made it difficult or impossible to obtain an abortion after 6 weeks. That way, there would be no one to file suit against if you wanted to block the law. That's what makes it, sufficiently clever. I mean, it really shouldn't have worked, but it did. It should be noted that Texas lawmakers did not actually succeed in writing a law that no Texas official plays a role in enforcing. That's just the fiction of it, right? The plaintiffs in Jackson sued a Texas state judge who would hear lawsuits brought under SB 8, as well as the clerk of a Texas court charged with moving these cases through the courts. If Young, ex parte Young, means anything, these plaintiffs should have been allowed to move forward with their federal lawsuit. The Texas legislators thought, well, no police are going to track down people who had an abortion, so you can't sue the chief of police to enjoin the enforcement of this law. There are no Texas state actors involved. But if Texas people want to sue to win the bounties, they got to go to Texas state court. And the Texas state court has to rule in their favor in order for them to win the lawsuit, right? So there you go. Texas state actors involved in the enforcement of this law. But apparently not, because reasons. That's all there is to it, just because reasons. They said no. Gorsuch's majority opinion in Jackson holds that these suits against Texas state judges and clerks may not proceed. That means there's no way to obtain a federal court order halting SB 8. In fairness, an abortion provider could have conceivably waited until they were sued in Texas state court for violating SB 8 and then argued that SB 8 violates Roe v. Wade in state court. But even if Roe were still good law, now it's not, this defense is not adequate to protect abortion providers' rights. And that's because SB 8 doesn't simply allow any person who's not employed by the state of Texas to sue an alleged abortion provider. It also permits a victorious plaintiff to collect that bounty of at least $10,000 from the provider. And there is no upper limit to this bounty. And an alleged abortion provider who successfully defends against an SB 8 lawsuit can still be sued by other individuals hoping to collect the bounty. It doesn't stand as a bar against everyone else doing it. Anyone suspected of performing an abortion that violates SB 8 could be hit by hundreds or even thousands of lawsuits. And they would either have to hire an army of lawyers to defend against these lawsuits or risk being ordered to pay a bounty that has no upper limit. Either option risks bankruptcy. And I imagine that would be the immediate impact of it, right? If you sue an abortion provider and announce it to the state, if not the country, that you're doing this under SB 8 and I'm going to seek that bounty, right? There's nothing stopping anyone else from saying, oh, well, then I'm going to sue for one too. You can all join in. Everyone in Texas who's not a state employee can do the same. And regardless of the outcome of the first suit, they can file again. It doesn't matter. If taken seriously, moreover, Jackson permits states to use an SB 8-like structure to attack any constitutional right. A state might allow private bounty hunters to sue any journalist who publishes a news article that paints a Republican elected official in a negative light. Or it might prohibit private citizens from criticizing the state's governor. Shortly after Jackson was handed down, Democratic California Governor Gavin Newsom threatened to sign a law permitting private bounty hunters to sue anyone who manufactures, distributes, or sells an assault weapon. It remains to be seen whether this court would apply its Jackson decision to a state law attacking the Second Amendment or other constitutional freedoms, but if a court winds up applying Jackson only to constitutional rights that the majority of its members do not like, that's an even worse outcome for the rule of law than if it does apply Jackson's anti-constitutional rule to every SB 8 style law that makes it through any state legislature. The rule of law is the rule of equality. It means that the same rules must apply to liberal litigants as apply to conservatives. But the Supreme Court, the next section says, placed itself at the head of much of the executive branch of government as well. So this is also very important. This now turning to the West Virginia versus EPA case, another place in which they simply set arbitrary standards. In its late June decision in West Virginia versus EPA, the court effectively placed itself at the head of multiple executive branch agencies, one of the elected branches, as they say, above President Joe Biden, giving itself veto power over any regulation handed down by these agencies. In doing so, it fundamentally reshaped the U.S.'s separation of powers. Maybe you remember that from civics class. Many federal laws lay out a broad overarching policy and then give an executive branch agency authority to implement that policy through binding regulations. West Virginia, the case, not the state, concerned a provision of the Clean Air Act, which requires certain power plants to use the, quote, best systems of emission reduction that can be achieved with currently available technology, and then tasks the EPA with determining what is that best system that can reduce emissions and figuring out what it might be at any given moment. That way, if technology changes, they can require more of polluters. This way, as technology evolves, right, to allow cleaner energy production, the EPA can issue new regulations requiring the energy industry to adopt these cleaner technologies without Congress having to pass a whole new law. West Virginia, the case, imposed an arbitrary new limit on EPA's congressionally given authority, which appears nowhere in the Clean Air Act or in any other federal law. Under West Virginia, the EPA may not use its authority to encourage what they call generation shifting. That is, requiring the energy industry to shift from particularly dirty methods of energy production, such as coal, and toward cleaner methods, such as solar or natural gas, which is actually what we want and will be the point of the policy. Instead, the EPA may only use its authority to require existing coal plants to install new devices or otherwise alter how they burn coal to produce energy. To justify its policy judgment that generation shifting is not allowed, the court's 6 Republican appointees relied on something called the Major Questions Doctrine. Under this doctrine, the court explained in a 2014 opinion, we expect Congress to speak clearly if it wishes to assign to an agency decisions of vast economic and political significance. Thus, if a majority of the court deems a regulation to be too significant, it will strike it down unless Congress very explicitly authorized that particular regulation. But the court has never fully articulated what causes a regulation to be so significant that it runs afoul of this doctrine. And in any event, the doctrine comes from nowhere. The Constitution doesn't mention it, nor does any federal law. The court has, in effect, given itself the power to veto any regulation issued by the executive branch of government even when Congress broadly authorized an executive branch agency to regulate. Until very recently, the justices avoided such encroachments upon the executive's domain. As the court explained in Mistretta versus the United States in 1989, in our increasingly complex society, replete with ever-changing and more technical problems, Congress simply cannot do its job absent an ability to delegate power under broad general directives. Until a few years ago, the court's decisions urged judges to defer to federal agencies on nearly all policy-related questions. The reasons for this deference were twofold. As the court explained in Chevron versus Natural Resources Defense Council, the Chevron deference we sometimes refer to, agencies typically have much greater expertise in areas that they regulate than the judiciary. And federal agencies also have far more democratic legitimacy than unelected judges who serve for life. While agencies are not directly accountable to the people, the court said in Chevron, agencies answer to a president who is, maybe, accountable to the voters, and so it is entirely appropriate for this political branch of the government to make such policy choices. By the way, if you just simply ignore the people and cheat your way into the presidency, maybe you don't deserve that deference after all. It's one of the things I've been saying. But now the court has given itself the power to declare any regulation that it does not like to be a sin against the Major Questions Doctrine, and in so doing, veto that regulation. That doesn't just introduce far too much arbitrariness into federal law. It's also an extraordinary transfer of power away from an elected branch of government and toward a judiciary staffed by unaccountable judges. That's right. And it's problematic. And it's about the end of the program for today, even though there's much more to discuss, including this weird concept. The court does not behave as though it is bound by legal texts. Isn't that interesting? Why should it be? And the next section after that, the court claims the power to decide what happened in the past and maybe even make up its own facts or broccoli mandates or what have you. The court, of course, has no sense of humility. Another section addressed by Ian Millhiser here. There's still a lot left to go in all of this. We haven't even gotten to the part about the arbitrariness with which they can now act and the fact that they understand very well that there's no appeal from them, and it does not matter whether their rulings make sense. Normally it used to matter because, one, they didn't want to be embarrassed, but two, the predictability factor that Ian mentions, right? In order for businesses and individuals and governments and all sorts of actors in the wider policy arena and in the economy to know what was going to happen to them if they took certain actions under the law, that's worth an awful lot. It's a big part of our economic engine. That's gone now, but they're, of course, fiscally conservative or something, and they love the economy, et cetera, until they don't. Now, that's just the breaks, I guess, when all you're interested in is getting to that Grand Marnier souffle at the end.
From netrootsradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, now it's time for you to listen to Justice Putnam, also in the morning, with the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next. What's he got on tap here? In a midnight move, Pennsylvania Repugs, as he calls them, wrote an abortion ban into the state's constitution. I think you can do that overnight without telling anyone. It's just the Constitution, right? Stay tuned.